Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe to keep me motivated to tell more interesting stories. Now, let's get started. I remember the exact day death arrived, not as a scream, not even as a whisper, but as a creak of old wood and the flapping of torn sails. The port at Messina was always noisy, filled with fishmongers shouting prices they didn't mean, and gulls that sounded like they were mocking us for being landlocked creatures. But that morning, it was eerily calm. The air tasted like metal, and I swear the sea looked blacker than usual. A merchant ship drifted in like it had forgotten how to steer. No cheers, no flags, just a crew slumped against crates and the sound of rats, and not the usual ones. No, these rats were different, fatter, more aggressive, like they knew something we didn't. One of them darted across my boot, and I almost kicked it out of reflex, but something stopped me. Probably the way it looked at me. No joke, it looked like it knew. That ship, turns out, had just come from the Crimea. Trade routes, spices, silk, you name it. But it also brought something else. The sailors had black boils under their arms and behind their ears. Fevered vomiting, delirious. One of them bit a dock worker before dying mid-sentence. We laughed at first, thought they'd gotten into bad wine or maybe a nasty stomach bug from foreign food. Historians still debate whether the bacteria came directly from that ship or if it was already spreading elsewhere. Either way, within days, people were dying in clusters. The mayor ordered the ship to be burned, which, let me tell you, only made things worse. It was like trying to put out a house fire by tossing in gasoline and saying, that should fix it. I lived in a modest flat above a tanner's shop. Smelled like roasted hide and vinegar most days. My neighbor Pietro was the first I knew who got sick. One day, he was whistling about the new wine barrels, and the next he was crawling to his door, pleading for water. His wife screamed all night. I don't even think she realized she was doing it. Just this dull animal, moaning, that drilled into your skull. By the third day, the city stank. No other way to put it. The sweet rot of corpses, the sharp bite of disinfectant herbs, and a kind of hopeless sweat that clung to everything. People began closing their windows. You'd pass by homes and see candles in the windows, but hear nothing. No laughing, no arguing. Just silence. Even the drunks were quiet, and that was the real red flag. We still went to the markets at first. Bread sellers wore cloths over their faces like that would stop anything. I bought figs once, and the seller insisted on throwing them to me rather than handing them directly. I dropped half of them and nearly got into a fight when I asked for more. You touch, you take, he growled. I started carrying garlic in my pocket. Don't laugh. That was actually considered smart at the time. Garlic vinegar-soaked rags, little cloth balls filled with lavender. We smelled like a salad bar, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't do it out of fear, more than belief. One odd thing, I noticed cats. They started disappearing. Not dying, disappearing. Some believed they were spreading the illness, so people killed them. But others whispered that they knew when death was coming and left. Honestly, I missed their judgmental stares. The church bells tolled nearly every hour. So many funerals you could barely tell one from the next. Eventually, they stopped ringing altogether. Priests started dying too. Even the ones who never left the monasteries. I remember thinking, if the holy men are dying, who's left to bless the rest of us? Not exactly comforting. The worst part wasn't the death, it was the waiting. You'd wake up and check your skin. Any lump, any bruise, and you'd spiral. I remember cutting myself on a nail once and convincing myself I was done for. Sat on the floor crying like a toddler until my friend Marta slapped me and said, "If you're gonna die, don't whimper like a boiled fish." I'd like to say we bonded over that, but she was gone 2 weeks later. She didn't even make a sound, just didn't show up for water collection, and then her door was nailed shut. There were rumors of entire villages being wiped out. Some said angels were descending in clouds of smoke and lifting souls from rooftops. Others claimed the devil was seen walking roads at night, counting the dead with a crooked finger. Personally, I think the devil was taking a vacation. No need to do the work when we were doing it ourselves. Historians still argue about how fast it spread. Some say it traveled faster than any disease had a right to. Others think fear made it seem faster, like shadows growing longer at dusk. But I was there. It moved like wind through wheat, bending everything in its path until only stubble remained. By the time I finally left Messina, half the homes were boarded up. Some burned, some quiet, and some still screaming. And me. I packed a small satchel, wrapped garlic around my wrist, kissed the stone wall of my building, and walked away like I wasn't scared out of my mind. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Because death had walked into Messina wearing a rat's grin, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. I wish I could say leaving Messina gave me peace, but honestly, it just gave me new nightmares. You ever walk through a city where every third building is boarded up, and the rest have people peeking through shutters like ghosts? That was Palermo. I arrived there a week after escaping the port, and already the city had a smell like unwashed feet and old candles and an energy that clung to your skin like sticky air before a thunderstorm. I tried blending in, which was easier than it sounds. Everyone was paranoid quiet and slightly hunched, like we were all waiting for the sky to fall. I bought some figs with the last of my silver and tried smiling at the vendor. He stared at me like I'd grown a third eye and muttered something about the devil wearing friendly faces. Comforting guy. I stayed in a room above a weaver's shop. The weaver had already fled, judging by the moldy bread in his cupboard and a chair that looked suspiciously knocked over. I didn't mind. The bed was still intact and the door had a sturdy lock. In those days, that was luxury. Privacy and security. That was the new gold. But the fever followed. Within days, I saw it creep into the city like a fog rolling in. People collapsed in the streets. One woman started coughing blood in the middle of the market, and everyone backed away so fast she might as well have screamed fire. Her husband tried to help her up, and a guard hit him with a staff, yelling, "Let her go, she's touched." He didn't. She died in his arms, and they both got tossed into a cart like broken furniture. Historians still debate whether the plague spread more quickly in cities due to density or poor hygiene. Honestly, both sound right to me. Palermo was full of people packed into small spaces, sharing food, water, air, and apparently death. I saw entire families vanish in a matter of days. One moment, they were hanging laundry, the next silence. I started coughing one night and nearly screamed myself awake. Spent the next 3 days lying perfectly still, counting my breaths, eating dried beans I found in the weaver's cellar. Turned out it was just dust. Still, I started wearing 2 layers of cloth over my face. Didn't help much, but at least I looked like I was trying. There was a doctor in the neighborhood, well, sort of. He wore this terrifying bird mask with glass eyes and a beak stuffed with herbs. Claimed it filtered the bad air. The children called him Crowface. Personally, I thought he looked like a carnival reject. Anyway, I followed him once. Watched him walk into a house, hear screaming, and walk right back out without even knocking. Just turned around and muttered, "Too late." Honestly, I think he was more performance art than medicine. Around that time, the flagellants showed up. Now, that was a sight. Dozens of them, shirtless, walking barefoot, chanting and whipping themselves raw with knotted cords. They believed the plague was punishment for humanity's sins, and they were doing their best to repent for all of us. I stood in a crowd and watched one of them collapse from blood loss. Another stepped over him like he was just a puddle. They passed through town twice a day. Some people joined them, hoping it would spare their families. Others cursed them, saying they stirred up the air and made things worse. One woman threw bread at them. One guy threw a rock. Neither was seen again. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movement helped spread the plague by moving from town to town, or if they were just tragic sideshows to the main event. Either way, I kept my distance, not because I didn't respect their conviction, but because they smelled like goats who'd lost a fight with a skunk. Despite everything, people still tried to live. I watched a couple get married through a window, the priest speaking from across the street like a man conducting an exorcism. Someone tried holding a market again. Lasted all of 2 hours before someone keeled over near the cheese. I met a girl named Elise during this time. She worked at a bakery, or what was left of one. Her hands were always covered in flour, which gave her the look of a friendly ghost. We talked most nights from opposite ends of the alley, never closer than that, not even a handshake. She said I'd rather die from loneliness than boils. I laughed. Probably shouldn't have, but the way she said it, it sounded like poetry. One evening, I brought her a peach I'd bartered from a traveling merchant. That was the last time I saw her. Her window stayed dark after that. I waited 3 nights, then moved on. Funny thing, cats returned. They showed up one morning yowling and strutting around like they owned the place. People took it as a sign. Good luck, maybe, or that the rats had moved on. Personally, I think the cats just got bored of the countryside. One day, a priest stood in the square and shouted, "The end is near," to which someone shouted back, "You said that last week." That made people laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks. The priest sulked off like a dog, scolded for barking too much. I never saw him again. And then there were the fires. Whole buildings were torched to stop the spread. If someone got sick, sometimes the family locked the doors and burned the place down themselves. It became a kind of ritual. No funerals, no prayers. Just ash and silence. I left Palermo the same way I arrived, quietly. No goodbyes, no plan. Just walking toward wherever death hadn't arrived yet. The odd fact, some people believed snakes were the cure. Seriously, they'd pay for powdered snake meat. Saw it sold next to dried fish once. I thought about trying it, didn't. Still not sure if that was wisdom or luck. I walked north. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying not just myself, but every ghost I'd picked up along the way. And still the fever followed. By the time I reached Florence, I'd perfected the art of pretending I had somewhere to be. You walk a little faster. Keep your head low, eyes alert, but never lingering. It makes people assume you're clean, untouched, safe. It's amazing what confidence can hide fear-hunger and about 4 weeks of not bathing. Florence had tried to act like it was immune. Rich city, stone buildings, art and pride and money dripping from its fingers. But the truth was smeared all over the alleys in the form of dirty linen and that telltale stink of unwashed despair. The plague doesn't care how rich your uncle is if you're coughing blood into your pillow. I found work, sort of. A group of grave diggers needed an extra hand. Technically, I wasn't digging. I was dragging bodies onto carts, pushing carts to pits, pushing myself to sleep at night. I didn't use my real name. No one did anymore. Too painful to hear it. too dangerous to be remembered. We worked at night, mostly because daylight had become something sacred. Everyone wanted to believe the sun could save them, that if they stayed inside until morning, nothing bad could happen. So they shut their shutters and prayed while we hauled their loved ones off like sacks of flour. There was a man in our group named Ludovico, big guy, used to be a butcher before all this, had hands like hams and a voice like a distant earthquake. One night he said, "Funny, I used to chop meat. Now I just carry it." Then he laughed and offered me some dried sausage. I didn't take it. Historians still debate whether Florence suffered the worst or if it just documented the most. Some say half the population vanished. Others say it was more. All I know is we ran out of space to bury them. We started using plague pits outside the city. Just trenches, really. No markers, no prayers. Toss and cover, toss and cover. It got to the point where even the priests stopped showing up. I asked Ludovico once, "Don't you ever wonder who they were?" He just shrugged and said, "They were us. That's enough." But death doesn't just bring silence. It brings noise in unexpected places. There was this strange woman who stood outside the cathedral every afternoon, reciting poetry to the air. Nobody listened, but she kept showing up. One of her lines stuck with me. "Death is a gentleman with too many invitations." Weird, right? But beautiful in a totally depressing way. I started carrying lavender in my shirt, stuffed under the collar. It didn't do anything. Just helped me believe I was still capable of smelling something that wasn't rot. That, and it helped mask the scent of the cloth we wrapped the dead in. It's wild how your brain can adjust to anything, even that. Some of the doctors said they were developing immunity. Others claimed they had pure blood or some nonsense. One guy carried a hot poker around and said burning your skin daily would ward it off. He lasted a week before collapsing in front of a bakery. No one touched him, not even for his coin pouch. And then came the weird part. People started partying. I'm serious. Rich families who hadn't yet fallen sick would throw feasts, big ones, tables of meat and wine music in the air, laughter echoing down streets where people had died the night before. Their reasoning: if the world was ending, might as well enjoy the ride. I watched one from a rooftop, watched them dance and kiss and drink, like it was a festival instead of a funeral. Part of me envied them. The other part, I hoped the wind blew their way that night. An odd little fact I heard from a stable boy: some believed rubbing crushed emeralds into your skin could cure the plague. You'd think something that sparkly would help your mood at least. He tried it, turned green, got laughed out of the tavern. I never saw him again either. There was this one street I hated walking by. They called it Widow's Way. Every window had black cloth hanging. Every door marked with a white cross. Legend said if you walked it alone at night, you'd hear whispers calling your name. Personally, I thought it was the wind, but I still avoided it. I spent a few nights sleeping under the cathedral steps. The stone was cold, but the priests had mostly locked themselves inside, so I figured it was safe. One night, an old woman sat beside me. Said her son used to play violin in the square. She asked if I'd ever heard him. I said maybe. She died that night. Didn't make a sound. The next morning a friar came out, saw me sitting beside her body, and offered me a loaf of bread. I nodded in thanks and asked if he'd say something for her. He just looked up at the sky and whispered, "I think she already knows." Historians still can't agree on whether the church helped or hindered during the plague. Some say they gave hope. Others say they just handed out guilt and holy water. I say it depends on the priest. Florence finally broke. when the bell tower stopped ringing. No one had the heart or the strength to pull the ropes. Silence in a city that proud was louder than any scream. That's when I knew it was time to move on. I left behind the lavender, the pit, even Ludovico. He offered me more sausage. I almost said yes. Instead, I hugged him. First time I'd touched another person in weeks. He didn't flinch, just said, "Good luck, ghost boy." And I walked, again, toward cities that might still have bells, or poetry, or maybe just fewer bodies. But even then I knew death didn't just walk into Europe. He unpacked his bags and made himself at home. The first time I saw a monastery up close, I expected peace, serenity, maybe even some freshly baked bread and a warm bed if I was lucky. What I got instead was a collapsing wall, a garden full of dead herbs, and monks who looked like they hadn't seen sleep since the last comet passed overhead. They let me in because I lied, told them I was a scholar from Pisa looking for shelter and prayer, wore my best shirt, only had 2 holes instead of 5. They didn't ask too many questions. Desperation makes even holy men lower their standards. Inside, it smelled like beeswax and mildew. Every hallway echoed. Every door creaked. There was a heaviness in the air, like someone had been crying in the corner of every room just moments before I walked in. The monks didn't talk much. They mostly shuffled from prayer to duty heads down, lips moving without sound. A few were coughing discreetly into their sleeves. I pretended not to notice. They pretended they weren't dying. One monk, Brother Matteo, actually did speak. He'd been a teacher once before taking vows, had a sharp mind and sharper eyes. He showed me the scriptorium where ancient books lay open like wounded birds. I asked what he was copying. He shrugged. Last rites in 7 languages. Covering our bases. I laughed. He didn't. At night, the monastery became something else entirely. Candles flickered in corners with no one nearby. Doors opened slightly and then closed again. Once, I heard a soft moan in the chapel and found no one there. I told myself it was the wind, even when I knew better. Historians still debate how much knowledge was lost during the plague. Books burned, scholars vanished. Entire schools of thought blinked out like snuffed candles. But here among these broken men in brown robes, it felt like knowledge wasn't gone. It was just too afraid to speak. There was a cellar beneath the library. I wasn't supposed to go down there. Naturally, I did. It was filled with jars. Tiny ones, labeled in shaky Latin. Dried frogs, crushed beetles, something that looked suspiciously like powdered toenails. I asked Brother Matteo about it, and he said the old ways, when the new ways fail. They believed some of these things could cure the plague, or at least balance the humors. I nodded as if that made sense. Meanwhile, I silently promised myself not to eat or drink anything I couldn't identify on sight. One odd detail that stuck with me there was a wall of skulls in the far corner. Not buried, not hidden, just there, cleaned and stacked like some macabre display. Matteo said they were ancestors watching over us. I said I preferred my ancestors less observant. The monks prayed 5 times a day, sometimes 6, when another one of them collapsed. I started joining in, not out of belief, but out of rhythm. Something about kneeling next to people who'd lost more than I had made me feel tethered to something again. Then came the stranger. He arrived one morning wrapped in a dark cloak, with hands so pale they looked like they'd never seen the sun. Didn't say his name, just whispered, "I seek silence." The abbot let him stay in the guest quarters. Within 2 days, 3 monks fell ill. I watched him from afar. He didn't eat with us, didn't pray. He spent hours in the graveyard, walking among the stones, muttering to himself. One night, I followed him, found him standing over a fresh grave, holding a bundle of herbs and humming a tune that felt older than Latin. I asked him, "Who are you?" He said, "Someone who remembers what the world forgot." Cryptic, sure. But that was kind of the vibe back then. Historians still argue whether the plague arrived in waves or as one long tide. Some believe there were different strains, one more deadly than the next. The man in the cloak. He said it wasn't a sickness at all. Said it was the earth reclaiming what man had spoiled. Again, very cryptic. He left without warning, just vanished one morning. The abbot claimed he was an angel. Matteo said he was a madman. Me, I wasn't sure. But after he left, the sick monks began recovering. Not all, but enough to notice. Enough to wonder. We held a small mass the following Sunday. First one with singing in weeks. My voice cracked on every note, but I didn't care. It felt like breathing again. I left the monastery a few days later. Matteo pressed a page of poetry into my hand. To remember, he said. I never read it. Couldn't. Something about that place made me afraid of knowing too much. Before I left, I passed by the wall of skulls one more time. One of them had a crack shaped like a crescent moon. I hadn't noticed it before. I swear it looked like it was smiling. The odd fact, some believed ringing church bells could drive out the plague. Whole towns would gather just to toll them until their arms gave out. I tried it once. Just got a headache. When I stepped out of the monastery gates, I felt both lighter and heavier, like I'd left something behind, but taken something with me. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the echo of all those prayers that never reached the heavens. Either way, I walked on, and the world didn't feel quite the same. It was somewhere near Lucca that I first picked up a shovel and started helping bury strangers. Don't ask me how I got there. The days had started bleeding into each other like bruises. I just walked until my feet told me to stop. And Lucca was where they gave up. The town was still clinging to the idea of order, which was kind of adorable in a tragic way. There were notices posted about curfews, lists of banned items, and official rules about how many people could attend a funeral. Spoiler alert, nobody was attending funerals anymore. Just gravediggers and grief. There was a group of us diggers, priests, runners, who moved bodies from one part of the town to the next. We called ourselves the Last Hands. Not because we were heroes. We just didn't die fast enough to quit. Our tools were blunted, our backs were breaking, and our humor was pitch black. Ludovico would have fit right in. One guy, Gianni, used to whistle opera while he worked. Another, Lucia, swore she saw angels every time she swung her spade. I never saw angels, but I did see rats the size of cats. That felt significant. Most of our work happened at night. Not for any poetic reason, it was just cooler. And the shadows were more forgiving. You could trick yourself into thinking what you were lifting wasn't a person. Just a weight, a task, a thing to be moved and forgotten. We wore long cloaks and wrapped our faces, still caught the smell. It seeped into your nose, your throat, your dreams. It's hard to describe exactly, but it was like wet leather mixed with old blood and moldy bread. Even now, I sometimes wake up thinking I smell it. Isn't that just delightful? Historians still debate whether these mass burials helped slow the plague or spread it faster. Some say the pit system was logical. Others argue it concentrated the disease underground, letting it fester. But at the time, we weren't thinking strategy. We were just trying to keep the dead from stacking up like firewood. There was a boy, maybe 9 or 10, who used to watch us from behind a fence. Every night. never said a word, just stood there clutching a wooden toy. One day, he wasn't there. The next night, he was in the cart, still holding the toy. Lucia cried for hours. You'd think it would get easier. It didn't. You just got more tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and makes your soul feel like it needs to sit down. We worked fast. No one lingered. The goal was to finish the job before you could learn the names of the people you were burying. Once, I found a necklace around a woman's neck that had my mother's name on it. I didn't take it. Just closed her cloak and kept moving. An odd little fact. Some believed that the direction a body faced in the grave could affect whether it found peace. East for resurrection, west for doom. I asked Johnny about it once. He just said, we're lucky if they land facing down. We had a system. Lucia dug. I hauled. Johnny poured vinegar on the carts like it was holy water. A priest named Father Renato came by once a week to bless the grounds, which mostly involved waving a book and muttering like he was haggling with the divine. He didn't last long. Got sick after giving last rites to a nobleman's son. Rumor was the family tried to bribe God with gold. The plague didn't accept bribes. One night, we ran out of space. Just nothing left. Every trench was full. Every cart was still overflowing. Gianni stood there, looking out at the endless mounds of earth, and said, we need a bigger hole. So we made one. It took 3 days. No talking, no jokes. Just digging until our hands bled. And when we were done, we dumped them all in and covered it without ceremony. I said a few words under my breath. I don't remember what they were. Probably something like, I'm sorry. That was becoming my default prayer. Historians still can't agree on whether the plague changed burial rites out of necessity, or if it signaled a deeper shift in religious thinking. Maybe both. All I know is after a while, the dead stopped feeling sacred. They just felt heavy, and still I stayed. Lucia eventually left, said she was going to find her sister. Gianni followed her, said he was done with holes. I didn't ask where they went, didn't want to know. For a few days, it was just me. I started talking to the corpses. Nothing dramatic, just little updates. Rained today. Found a new patch of garlic. Still here. Then one night, I found someone I recognized. A merchant I'd met weeks ago who had sold me almonds and told me I looked like someone famous. He had a friendly face. Still did somehow. I sat beside him and told him the story of the boy with the toy. Then I buried him. That was the night I decided to leave again. Not because I was afraid, but because the silence was getting too loud. The oddest belief I heard around then, that if you walked backward through a cemetery at midnight and sang a hymn, the plague would skip over you. I considered trying it. Instead, I packed my things and walked forward, because the grave diggers were dancing now, not out of joy, but delirium. Sore backs and empty stomachs, and madness bubbling under the surface. Some laughed, others wept. One man stripped naked and walked into the forest, saying he was going to negotiate with death. I never saw him again. I looked down at my hands, blistered and calloused, and realized I'd touched more dead than living in the last month. I didn't feel haunted. I felt forgotten, so I left Lucca and didn't look back. I wandered into a village that didn't have a name, not on any map, not on any signpost. It was nestled between two hills, like it was trying to hide from the rest of the world, and for a while, it had succeeded. There were no bodies in the street, no pitiful screams behind doors, just birdsong and the faint sound of water trickling from a well. It felt like I had walked into a painting of a memory too clean, too quiet. Naturally, I assumed it was a trap, but the people welcomed me, sort of. They didn't exactly throw a feast or anything, but they nodded, offered water, and didn't immediately ask if I was carrying the plague. That was the new standard of hospitality. Their village elder, a woman named Alessa, met me near the square and asked me only one question. "Do you wish to live?" I blinked. I haven't made other plans. She stared a moment longer, then said, "Then follow the rules, or leave." I chose to stay. Turns out this little village had its own methods. They'd closed themselves off early, blocked the road, posted sentries, even bribed travelers to stay away. No one in, no one out. They even had a system of symbols painted on doors to indicate food supplies, health status, and whether or not someone was showing symptoms. It looked like a mix between hieroglyphics and grocery lists. They wore herbs around their necks, sage, rosemary, thyme. Everyone smelled like a stew. I was given a pouch of it and told not to take it off, even to sleep. And then came the strangest rule: no touching. Not even your own family. Hugs, handshakes, even brushing shoulders were forbidden. Lovers waved to each other across the square like awkward teenagers. Children practiced clapping games alone. Weddings were held with a rope between the bride and groom. Historians still debate whether these extreme measures helped or were just performative. Some claim isolationist villages like this avoided the worst. Others suggest they simply delayed the inevitable. But at the time, this place felt like a miracle in a world full of smoke and weeping. There was a man named Tomas who ran the village bakery. He made the best bread I'd tasted in months. Actual flavor crust that didn't break your teeth, and he even had honey. When I asked how he still had bees, he pointed to a tree stump filled with buzzing and said bribery. He had trained his bees to stay put with sugar cubes. I don't know if that's true, but it made me smile. I settled into a rhythm, helped tend the communal garden, reinforced the wall, assisted the herbalist with her poultices, which smelled like burned socks, but supposedly kept your lungs strong. I stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped checking my pulse every hour. For the first time since Messina, I slept through the night. Then someone coughed. A little girl named Sophie, sweet, quiet, always carried around a wooden duck. Her mother tried to hide it, said it was dust. Then she said it was nerves. Then she said nothing at all. The next morning, the white symbol was painted on their door. It meant exile. Alessa stood in front of the house with two men holding staffs. The woman screamed, begged, said it was just a cold. But rules were rules. She and Sophie were given a basket of food and led beyond the barrier. The door was painted black. No one spoke for hours. I sat under a tree that night, chewing stale bread and wondering if safety was just another kind of death. The kind you walk around in like a warm coat until it squeezes too tight. Odd fact, in some places, people believe tying a dead toad to your foot could draw the illness out through your skin. I tried mentioning that to Tomas once. He just raised an eyebrow and said, "Let's stick to time." But I started noticing changes. People grew tense, suspicious. The absence of death made them paranoid. If a chicken clucked wrong, they looked at it sideways. If someone sneezed, they slept outside that night. It wasn't a village anymore. It was a waiting room with walls. I tried to stay useful. Fixed fences, told stories by the firelight ones, old tales about foolish kings and clever farmers. But the laughter was thin, and eyes always flicked to the edge of the village where Sophie and her mother had vanished into the trees. Then came the night it returned. I heard it before I saw it coughing. Wet. Gurgled. A man named Paolo staggered into the square and fell to his knees. He'd been strong, silent, the kind who could lift a barrel like it was a loaf of bread. Now he was shivering and pale dark patches blooming along his neck. They didn't exile him. They burned the house, with him still inside. Alessa stood there, eyes wet, holding a torch. She didn't speak. No one did. We just watched as the flames took him, and with it, the illusion. Historians still debate if the plague taught communities resilience or cruelty. That night, I learned it could do both at the same time. The next morning I left. Thomas gave me a loaf of bread and a pouch of honey. "You'll find a place," he said. I didn't believe him, but I thanked him anyway. I passed the tree with the bees. It was quiet now, and so was I. I walked north again, where the hills got sharper and the wind began to bite. Somewhere past Bologna, the sky turned gray and just stayed that way. Days blurred together under that dull, endless lid. Everything was wet, your boots, your blankets, your bones. It was the kind of damp that made your soul wrinkle. Food was harder to come by. Villages I passed through had already been picked clean. Doors hung off hinges. Wells were dry. Even the animals had stopped bothering to flee. They just stared at you like they'd made peace with extinction. It was around this time I joined a caravan. We were about 30 people, all strangers, all survivors, all pretending we weren't one meal away from eating moss. The leader was a woman named Benedetta. She wore a hood made from an old curtain and carried a dagger with a handle shaped like a fish. Don't ask me why. I didn't. She had rules. No touching. No talking at night. No fires unless we were in a valley. And if someone got sick, we left them behind. No exceptions. We called ourselves the Dust People, partly because of how we looked, partly because we expected to turn into dust at any moment. The road was more dangerous than the plague in some ways. Desperate people were everywhere. Once, we were ambushed by a group of ragged men who smelled like old meat and demanded everything we had. Benedetta sliced one's arm open without blinking. They ran. We kept moving. Odd fact of that week. Some travelers wore bird feathers on their hats because they believed it tricked the sickness into thinking they could fly away. One man had a whole chicken carcass tied to his belt. We didn't ask questions. We didn't want the answers. At night, I'd lie on the cold ground, listening to people breathe. It became a kind of comfort hearing those soft, fragile exhales. Proof that life still flickered in the dark. One morning, I woke to find a boy curled up near me, maybe 7 years old. He didn't speak, just stared with huge, silent eyes and followed me everywhere after that. Benedetta called him Echo. I asked if he had a name. She said he did. Doesn't matter now. He never coughed, never smiled, just walked, slept, ate what I gave him. I never touched him, just kept him near. Historians still debate whether caravans like ours helped spread the plague farther into the countryside. Some think we were like ants carrying rot from town to town. Others think we were the only reason isolated groups learned how to protect themselves. Personally, I think we were both cause and effect, like a match and the fire it creates. One village let us in briefly. They made us sleep outside their walls, checked our arms and necks with sticks. We stayed 3 days, long enough to trade for bread, patch our boots, and bury a woman who died quietly in her sleep. I didn't know her name. No one did. Benedetta insisted we keep moving. Stay in one place too long and death learns your name, she said. I started carving tally marks into a bit of bark I carried in my coat. One for each day I didn't cough. By the time we reached the edge of Milan, it looked like a porcupine. Milan had built walls, not just physical ones, but mental ones too. They believed their city was invincible. Guards patrolled the gates, turning away anyone with so much as a limp. They even had runners that shouted news of new deaths, loudly, as if volume could keep it out. We were allowed to camp outside the southern wall, but not inside, not even for food. I watched from a hilltop as they burned clothes in giant pits and poured vinegar over the cobblestones. It was like watching someone mop a battlefield. Echo stayed close. One evening, he tugged on my coat and pointed to a black dog staring at us from a distance. It didn't move, just stood there, eyes glowing in the moonlight. When I turned back a second later, it was gone. I asked Benedetta about it. She said they say death walks beside us, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast. Either way, don't feed it. We lost 5 people that week. 1 to fever, 2 to thieves. 1 wandered off in the fog. The last simply didn't wake up. No one cried. We just rearranged the caravan. That's what survival looked like: constant reshuffling. Grief postponed. Hope rationed like water. I began dreaming about places I'd never seen. Wide fields, quiet lakes, homes that didn't smell like smoke and vinegar. I woke up gasping, like my body didn't believe such places could exist anymore. One night, Benedetta told me she used to be a teacher, said her students gave her a new name every week. Miss Fish, Miss Bee, Miss Mean. I laughed. I asked if she missed it. She stared into the dark and said no one should ever miss before. I stopped asking questions after that. Historians still wonder why some people survived while others didn't. Blood type, immune strength, dumb luck, take your pick. I started believing it had something to do with forgetting. The more you let go of the past, the lighter you became. Like death couldn't hold on if you didn't have anything weighing you down. We reached a fork in the road. One path led toward the Alps, the other toward the sea. Benedetta said choose. I chose the sea. I needed to believe something waited beyond the horizon, even if it was just more sky. The path to the sea was longer than we expected. Or maybe it just felt that way because we kept losing people. Every few days, someone would stop walking. Not because they were sick, just tired. Tired in a way that didn't come from hunger or blisters. The kind that made you sit down under a tree and decide that moving simply wasn't worth it anymore. I didn't judge them. I almost joined them once, but Echo kept walking. And as long as he did so, did I. We passed through towns that had already given up. Streets overgrown with weeds, doors swinging on hinges, churches with broken bells. In one village, I found a doll sitting on a well, perfectly clean, untouched by rot or rain, just waiting for a child that would never return. We didn't stay long. Eventually, we reached a port town smaller than Messina, quieter than Palermo. The kind of place where the ships moan against the docks even when there's no wind. It looked abandoned, but not dead, like it had simply paused, waiting for someone to press play again. There were still boats. Most were empty, tethered loosely, like forgotten horses. One had smoke curling from its chimney. Benedetta raised her hand. We ask once. If they say no, we keep walking. We didn't need to ask. The captain was a man named Gale. Tall, leathery skin voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. He looked us over, saw Echo clinging to my coat, and said, 2 coins ahead. We had 4. Benedetta paid for herself and me, told the others they'd meet us at the next port. They didn't argue. That's how you know a group's been through hell together. No one fights over endings. Echo wasn't counted. Gale looked at him, then at me, and said, "Ghosts ride free." I didn't know if he meant it literally. I didn't ask. We boarded at dusk. The sea smelled sharp, metallic, alive, like it had no idea what had happened on land. Or maybe it didn't care. Historians still debate how the plague moved across water. Some say rats snuck aboard ships. Others claim infected sailors brought it with them, hidden behind sunburned skin and hollow eyes. But that night, the boat felt clean, untouched. We set sail with no destination, just the promise of movement. The horizon swallowed us quietly. No fanfare, just the steady rhythm of waves slapping wood. I stood at the rail, staring into nothing. The stars blinked like distant witnesses. Echo fell asleep, curled against a coil of rope. Gale steered with one hand and smoked with the other. No one spoke. Odd fact. I heard from a sailor once some believed painting eyes on the front of a ship would keep death from boarding. I checked Gale's boat the next morning. There were eyes, big blue cartoonish ones. It made me feel strangely safer. Days passed, maybe weeks. It was hard to tell. The sea has a way of stealing your sense of time. Every sunrise looked the same. Every sunset whispered, just one more day. We stopped at islands, little ones, barely more than rocks with trees, picked wild fruit, caught fish. Once we found a hut with a working well. Gale called it luck. Benedetta called it mercy. Echo started speaking again. Just a word or two, mostly names, sometimes numbers. Once he whispered, Mama and I pretended not to hear. He never said it again. One evening, Gale told me about a port farther north past Genoa. Said the people there had built a wall of mirrors to confuse death. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He didn't smile. You'd be surprised what people try when they're scared. We never saw the Mirror City. A storm hit the next night. Not a biblical one, just enough to remind us we were small. Waves tossed the boat like a toy. Echo threw up on my boots. I held onto the mast and prayed to every god I could remember, even the ones I didn't like. The mast cracked, but didn't break. The sails tore, but didn't fall. When the sun rose, Gale said, "We're still alive," and lit another cigarette, like he hadn't almost drowned 12 hours earlier. We limped into a port town 3 days later. I don't remember the name. Doesn't matter. What matters is it was alive. Children ran through streets. Merchants argued over fish prices. Someone was playing music on a lute horribly but enthusiastically. It didn't smell like death. It smelled like soup. Benedetta cried, not loudly, just a single tear wiped away before anyone could see. I only noticed because I felt the same one crawling down my own face. Historians still argue whether the Black Death truly ended or if it just paused. Some claim it went into hiding. Others think it changed form, mutating into something we could live with. But as I stood in that town square, breathing air that didn't feel heavy, I started to believe it didn't matter. We'd changed. We weren't the same people who'd run from Messina or whispered prayers in plague pits. We were something else now, something quieter, hungrier, but still standing. Gale sold his boat, said he was done with the sea. Benedetta said she might stay open a school again. I believed her. Echo took my hand. For the first time, I didn't pull away. We were alive. And for now, that was enough. I didn't expect to ever return to the places I left behind. In fact, I swore I wouldn't. Swore it to myself during long nights beside dead fires when all I could do was wrap my coat tighter and try not to think about the faces I used to know. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was closure. Maybe guilt. Or maybe I just wanted to see if anything had survived besides me. Echo didn't come. He stayed with Benedetta, who now ran a little house with red shutters and 3 chickens she insisted were her students. She said, "He's safe here, and I've always wanted to teach a rooster algebra." I kissed her cheek, something I hadn't done to another human in months, and left before I could change my mind. I retraced my steps, slowly, cautiously. Towns I'd once trudged through looked different now, less hollow. Still scarred, yes, but no longer bleeding. Messina, once the mouth that coughed out death across Europe, had begun to live again. Children played in its streets. The bells tolled for weddings again. The sea was the same color I remembered, that dark bottomless blue. I stood on the very dock where I'd first seen that ghost ship roll in like an omen. Closed my eyes, could still hear the creak of its wood, the scream of a rat. Historians still debate where it started. That first case, that patient zero. Some say it was a Genoese sailor. Others think it was even earlier, far across the mountains in some forgotten village, already swallowed by time. But standing there, I didn't care anymore about origins, only about what came after. I went searching for the monastery. Took me a few wrong turns and a lot of climbing, but I found it. Or what was left of it. The roof had caved in. The garden was overgrown. Vines curled over the stone walls like the earth was taking back its secrets. But the scriptorium was still intact, and in it a single book sat open. Dusty, sure, molded at the corners, but legible. It was the one Matteo had shown me. The page he'd been copying still marked with a faded ribbon. I whispered a thank you, though I didn't know who to. And then I walked past the skull wall, now mostly collapsed bones scattered like dice. One still had the crescent-shaped crack I remembered, still looked like it was smiling. Odd fact, some people believed burying a rooster alive at the crossroads could end a plague. Others said planting a coin under your bed on the night of a full moon would keep sickness away. None of those things worked, but they gave people something to do while the world spun out of control. And maybe that was enough. Florence was next, or what Florence had become. It had changed like everything. Fewer people, simpler lives. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by a quiet determination. A man fixed shoes by the side of the road. A girl sold candles shaped like birds. A woman sang while sweeping her doorstep. I passed the cathedral. Someone had painted a dove on its wall in white chalk. It looked like it was flying straight off the stone. I sat on the steps, the same ones I'd slept on once, and watched the sun fall behind the city's shoulders. A breeze stirred my hair. I didn't flinch. I wasn't the same man anymore. Historians still argue what the Black Death meant, whether it was divine punishment or pure biology, whether it was the end of one world or the start of a new one. For me, it was both. It took everything. And it gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity. The names of those I lost still sit in my chest like stones. Marta, Elise, Matteo, even Ludovico, who never stopped offering sausage. I carry them with me, and that's why I keep walking. Not to run anymore, but to remember, to honor, and to bear witness. Because death walked through Europe once, and I walked beside it. But now I walk alone, and ahead of me, there's life. The road had grown quieter, not empty, but changed. Even the silence felt different now. Less like the echo of death, and more like the pause before a song begins. I kept walking, through towns that were rebuilding, through fields where new crops poked up stubbornly from soil that had once been soaked with tears, through woods that no longer whispered threats, but instead offered shade and maybe even comfort. I passed a farm where 3 generations now work side by side. A child waved at me while riding on her grandfather's shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like years, I waved back without thinking. Not because I wasn't afraid anymore, but because I had learned to live with fear the way one lives with a scar. You don't forget it, but you stop letting it define your face. Some nights, I camped beneath the stars. Other nights, I traded stories for shelter. People wanted to talk again, not just about what they'd lost, but what they'd found. Strength, faith, or even just the ability to laugh at an old joke without choking on guilt. One evening, I joined a group by a riverside. Someone played a flute. Someone else roasted turnips. I told them a tale about a man who tried to outwalk death, only to find he'd been giving death directions the whole time. They laughed. Not politely, genuinely. I laughed too. Historians still argue about what ended the plague. Some say it was the quarantines. Others point to shifts in weather, in trade routes, and rat populations. But no one talks about the people who simply refused to stop living, who danced in the shadows, who buried their dead and sang anyway, who planted herbs on rooftops, wrote poems in the margins of Bibles, kissed each other behind shuttered windows, and decided in the face of despair to carry on. People like Echo, who I hear now, runs through fields with other children and talks more than he ever did beside me. People like Benedetta, who teaches arithmetic and bakes too much bread and yells at chickens like they're unruly students. And maybe people like me. I don't settle anywhere for long. Something in me still moves, like the sea under a calm sky. But I leave things behind now. Bits of myself. A carved wooden bird here. A whispered story there. A name etched in the bark of a tree. I carry their memories, like lanterns. And when the wind blows, I swear I can hear their voices again. Marta calling me a boiled fish. Matteo humming in the scriptorium. Ludovico shouting more sausage. Echo laughing quietly beside me. Odd final fact. There's a belief that when you survive something terrible, your soul gets stretched thin. Like it had to grow larger to hold everything you saw. Everything you lost. I think that's true. But I don't feel hollow anymore. I feel full. And as I sit here finishing this tale, I don't pretend to have all the answers. I only have memories, footsteps, and breath in my lungs. The Black Death walked through Europe. It changed everything, but so did we. We rebuilt, we remembered, and somehow we remained. So, that was my journey. The story of what it was like to live when so many didn't. I know it sounds bleak. It was. But there were moments, small ones, fleeting ones, that shined through all that darkness. The smell of baking bread in a village that dared to hope again. The sound of laughter beside a river. A single word spoken by a silent child. These things stitched the world back together, one thread at a time. I suppose the lesson is, we're more resilient than we think. More fragile too, but mostly we're survivors, carriers of memory, witnesses, storytellers, and sometimes just being here, still walking, still breathing, is a kind of rebellion. A quiet one, sure, but real. So when you hear the word plague, don't just think of numbers and maps and masks. Think of people, of hands that kept digging graves so the world wouldn't become one giant one, of voices that kept whispering prayers even when they weren't sure anyone was listening. We carry them with us, in every heartbeat, in every step forward. And if you're hearing this now, well, congratulations, you're still here, just like me. Thanks for walking with me. Until next time, breathe deep and keep going.